After 9.5 years of living and working in New Zealand, I could finally say that I am now finally a New Zealand citizen. And that means that I can also now call myself a Kiwi. So for today, I want to share with you my journey of how I became a New Zealand citizen and give some tips and advice for those wanting to move to New Zealand one day. And the good part is the New Zealand borders are finally opening. So the gist of it is that from the 31st of July 2022, applications for tourist and student visas will finally open. So it's a perfect opportunity if you've been wanting to visit New Zealand for a while and maybe just see what it's like to live here and actually see the beauty of this country and what makes this country so special. Because I've said this in my previous videos, I love New Zealand and New Zealand is my home and I see myself living here basically forever. But if you're curious to know what my background is about, it's Guido stuff. So these things that you see here, he's actually making that for a lesson plan because he's wanting to be a teacher. He made this himself, so he just cut some wood, painted it himself, and he's gonna use it as part of an activity for his next lesson plan, which I think is really cool. So, how long does it really take to become a New Zealand citizen? And what are the specific criteria to become one? There are actually 3 ways to become a New Zealand citizen, and that's by birth, by descent, or by grant. So by birth is plain and simple. You become a New Zealand citizen if you were born here. Now, citizenship by descent means that you were born overseas, but at least one of your parents was a New Zealand citizen by the time you were born. And the third one, which is how I got mine, is New Zealand citizenship by grant, meaning that you do have to apply for it and meet specific criteria to actually become one. So what is the criteria? Before I tell you that, what are actually the benefits of becoming a New Zealand citizen? So aside from being able to live in New Zealand indefinitely, meaning they can't kick you out basically, there are loads of benefits to becoming a New Zealand citizen. And the most obvious one would be having a New Zealand passport. So a New Zealand passport is actually considered a pretty strong passport, and the reason for that is because it gives you access to travel to over 100 countries visa-free. Based on the Passport Index website, New Zealand, amongst other countries, actually ranks number 4 as one of the strongest passports in the world. This also means that if you have a New Zealand passport or that you're a New Zealand citizen, you can actually move to our neighbor Australia and live there without having to apply for a visa. Now, another benefit is also being able to stand for Parliament or the New Zealand government. You also get full access to New Zealand education and have access to student loans and student allowances. You also have full economic and social rights, and you also get to represent New Zealand in sports. There are also some jobs in New Zealand that you have to specifically be a New Zealand citizen to be able to actually apply. So there are loads more benefits for being a New Zealand citizen, but basically you get to enjoy New Zealand, the benefits it provides, have access to education, healthcare, and everything like that while living here. And while it's not the best in the world, New Zealand does have pretty good education, healthcare, and the government is also the least corrupt. So those are just some things that are good about New Zealand and what makes it good to be a New Zealand citizen. Now, what are the actual requirements to become a New Zealand citizen by grant, and how did I actually become one? So the first one is actually presence requirements. So you need to have been living in New Zealand for a certain amount of time and intend to continue to live here to qualify for a New Zealand citizen. So how long specifically do you need to have been living here? You need to have been living in New Zealand as a resident for at least 5 years. So not on a visa, you have to be a resident for at least 5 years. And there are of course multiple ways of how you can become a resident, such as through work, or you can actually also become a New Zealand resident through partnership, which is actually how I got mine. Residency through partnership means that a New Zealand citizen sponsors you to become a New Zealand resident, and that goes through an application process, and there are specific criteria for that, but it's not as intense as other countries. So from what I remember, this could be totally different by now. You have to live together and prove to have been living together for at least a year, and you have to prove that you have a genuine and stable relationship. But residency through work, there are specific criteria for that. that. And most of the time you have to be on the short skill list, so that means that you have essential skills that New Zealand has a shortage of, so that your employer can then sponsor you to become a New Zealand resident. I think it's one of the, I don't know the full details, but I'll see if I could link some of that information down below. So aside from being a New Zealand resident for 5 years, there are actually also specific presence requirements for actually having been physically present in New Zealand. Based on the immigration website, you have to have been physically present in New Zealand for 240 days in each 12-month period. So that means that if you're a New Zealand resident, you can't actually go and live, let's say, in Fiji for 2 years, come back here for another 2 years, and then apply for New Zealand citizenship. That's not how it works. You have to actually be present living in New Zealand for at least 240 days per year for 5 years to be able to be eligible to apply for New Zealand citizenship. And the third presence requirement, which is fairly obvious, like I said, you have to intend to actually live in New Zealand indefinitely. So that covers the presence requirements. Now, the second requirement is language requirement. So that means that you need to be able to hold a basic conversation in English to become a New Zealand citizen. So you don't have to be extremely fluent, but you need to be able to converse with people in the English language, which is one of New Zealand's official languages, to actually become a New Zealand citizen. And I think that just makes a lot of sense. If you want to live here and work here, you obviously have to be able to talk to people at least at the basic level. And the third requirement is character requirements. So that means that you need to have not been in trouble with the law either in New Zealand or overseas to actually be able to be eligible to apply for New Zealand citizenship. So this doesn't include any parking tickets, because I do have a few of those, but basically you just need to not have broken any law in New Zealand. Now, it is different for driving offenses. Let's say, for example, you've been caught drunk driving for a few times and that caused you to lose your driver's license. They will actually look into that, so that would affect your New Zealand citizenship application. So you need to make sure that that doesn't happen for you to actually apply. So those are basically the requirements to become a New Zealand citizen. Now, the process of applying was actually pretty easy and simple. There's no interview required, there's no tests required. You just need to be able to meet those specific requirements, and then you are eligible to submit your application, which you could just do online. So that's exactly what I did. The fee or the cost to apply, approximately 500 New Zealand dollars, and the processing time takes 9 months to a year. But I actually got notified just last week that my application has been approved, and that was approximately 8 months before I got the approval. But you might be curious to know how they know that I could speak English fluently, if they, or at least hold a basic conversation, if they haven't actually met me or interviewed me. To be honest, I don't know. I think it's just in my records that I've been living and working here for such a long time. I went through high school here, so I do have records of passing the English subjects. So that's all I needed to do was apply. So after getting notified that you have been granted New Zealand citizenship, normally there's a citizenship ceremony that takes place before you become an official New Zealand citizen. But unfortunately, due to COVID, they decided not to have any ceremonies at this time until further notice. So unfortunately, I don't get to have a fancy ceremony and invite the people that are close to me, which I would have wanted to do, and that's what I was planning to do. But that's okay. I'm still very grateful for having been granted New Zealand citizenship. But actually, I need to kind of correct myself. I'm actually not yet a New Zealand citizen until I receive the official certificate that they're sending to me by mail. But for me, I'm just saying that I'm a citizen already because I got notification that it's been approved. I'm just waiting for the actual certificate. And once I've got the certificate handy, then I can actually apply for a New Zealand passport. And then that would open up so many opportunities and countries that I can travel to. And now that I'm a New Zealand citizen, I'm also still planning to keep my Philippine citizenship because I do intend to visit the Philippines quite often. My family lives there, so I think it's just a good idea for me to actually to get dual citizen. I am a Filipino and I'll always be a Filipino, and I think that's very important. So thank you so much for watching. If you want to know more details about coming to New Zealand in 2022, 2022 now that the New Zealand borders are opening, and what are the different visa options that are available to you? Let me know in the comment section below because I'm thinking of creating a video specifically just for that. And if you want more information about becoming a New Zealand citizen, I'll put the links down below of where you can find more information. If you're new to my channel, my name is Jules and I do create videos about my experiences in living here, and I go traveling, on adventures, and also just share some tips and advice about what it's like to live in New Zealand. So if you're interested to see more videos about that, make sure to hit that subscribe button down below. Thank you very much, and I will see you on the next video. See ya!